My name is Marjorie Ellison. Everyone used to call me Jory. I'm 25 years old, and for 12 years I've stayed away from the house where I grew up. Salem, Massachusetts was supposed to feel like home, but ever since my mother disappeared, it turned into a place of shadows and whispers. I swore I would never step foot in that house again. And yet, this Thanksgiving, I found myself walking up the cracked stone steps, my heart pounding so hard it felt like the whole street could hear it. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Warm light spilled out from the dining room, laughter echoing faintly. But the moment I stepped inside, every sound died. Forks froze mid-air. Glasses stopped halfway to lips, and 12 pairs of eyes landed on me like I was a ghost. For a second, I could smell the roasted turkey, the cinnamon pies cooling on the counter, but it was drowned out by the silence. Before I tell you why my mother vanished and where I was for 12 years, kindly hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you will not miss out on my stories. When I was 13, my world broke in half. I didn't see it coming, though maybe I should have. One night my mom tucked me into bed like normal, kissed my forehead, whispered, "Be brave for me," and left. The next morning, her side of the closet was empty. The smell of her perfume still hung in the air, faint, like a ghost refusing to leave. On the kitchen counter, there was only a folded piece of paper, just one line written on yellow paper in her looping handwriting. That paper changed everything, though my dad never told me what it said. He burned it the same day, right there in the sink, the smoke curling up into the ceiling while I cried, begging him to stop, but he never knew how smart I am. He just said, "Your mother made her choice." His eyes were glassy, but his voice was cold. That was the first time I realized silence could be a weapon. For months, I asked questions. For months, I searched for clues. Why she left, where she went, if she was safe. And every time I asked, my father's jaw tightened until finally he told me never to bring her up again. I was 13, scared, and already being told that my pain was inconvenient. But the real nightmare didn't begin until Verena walked into our lives. She appeared less than a year later, dressed in tailored skirts and wearing that perfect crimson lipstick that always seemed too sharp, too precise. I remember the first dinner with her at our old farmhouse table in Salem. She laughed at all my father's stories, her hand grazing his arm like she had rehearsed it. She turned to me, eyes sparkling but cold, and said, "So you must be Marjorie." Not Jory, not the nickname my mom gave me. Marjorie, like she was stamping me into someone else. Within 6 months, she moved in. Within a year, she became my stepmother. My father didn't ask me how I felt. He just told me it was time to accept change. But it wasn't just her. She brought someone with her, her son, Clayton. Clayton was 16, older, broader, smug. From the first day, he treated me like I was trespassing in my own home. He'd kick his muddy boots onto the coffee table, grin at me and say, "Don't you have homework or something?" If I protested, he'd smirk. If I told my dad, Verena would laugh softly and say, "Oh, Randall, teenagers tease. It builds character." But Clayton's teasing wasn't harmless. He once locked me out of the house in the middle of December while I stood crying on the porch, my hands turning red from the cold. When I finally got inside, Verena scolded me for overreacting. And my father? He just sat in his chair, eyes on the TV, pretending he didn't hear. That's when I realized the girl I used to be, the daughter of a mother who hugged and cared, was gone. By the time I was 15, the house no longer felt like mine. My room was too messy, Verena said, so she redecorated it without asking. The soft lavender walls my mom painted were replaced with beige. My posters came down. She even threw away the quilt my grandmother stitched for me. When I cried, she tilted her head, faked sympathy, and said, "Oh, sweetie, don't be so dramatic." Clayton would laugh behind her, always behind her. By 17, they had reduced me to a ghost in my own home. Family dinners were unbearable. Verena with her carefully plated meals, Clayton with his cruel jokes, my father with his silence. Every bite tasted like betrayal. I would sit there, my fork shaking, while Verena smiled at my father as though I didn't exist. One night, when Clayton mocked me for not having any friends, Verena chuckled and said, "Well, maybe if you were a little more like your mother, she wouldn't have left." My father flinched, but he didn't defend me. That was the night I made a decision. At 18, I packed my bag in the middle of the night. One duffel bag, 2 changes of clothes, and the little photograph of my mother and me at the beach in Gloucester. I stood in the hallway, staring at the shadows under my father's door. For a moment, I almost knocked, almost begged him to notice me, to stop me, to care. But he didn't stir. I walked out the front door, barefoot, the cold porch would biting into my skin. The house looked the same as always, tidy, perfect, lifeless. I swore I would never come back. 12 years passed. 12 years of building myself out of nothing. I worked odd jobs. Waitressed at a diner in Providence, with a smell of burnt coffee clung to my hair. Saved up for community college. Worked 2 jobs through school. Studied late at the library until my eyes burned. I kept going, step by step, even when the loneliness pressed so hard I thought I'd collapse. I told myself I didn't need family. I told myself I was better off alone. But every Thanksgiving, no matter where I was, the memories clawed back. Families gathering, laughter spilling from windows, cars parked in driveways. I pretended it didn't bother me, but deep down, I hated that I never got answers. I hated that my mother disappeared. I hated that my father chose silence. And I hated Verena, which is why this year, at 25, I finally came back. When I stepped into that house again, it smelled the same. Wood polish, faint cinnamon, and something artificial like a home that looked perfect but felt hollow. The dining room hadn't changed either. The long oak table, the same china plates, the same chandelier hanging above like a crown no one deserved. They were all there. My father, older now, lines cutting into his face, a fork halfway to his mouth. Verena beside him, flawless as ever, her blonde hair in a sleek bun. Clayton, broader, smugger, sitting at the far end. And scattered cousins and relatives I barely recognized. Every head turned when I walked in. Forks froze midair. The sound of the football game on TV muffled into silence. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, my throat dry. And then I said it. "Dad, I know the truth about the night Mom left." His fork clattered against the plate. His hand trembled. His eyes darted to Verena before settling on me, wide with shock. Verena didn't flinch. She smirked, just a tiny curl of her lips, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. And that's when I felt it, the shift in the room. No one moved. No one breathed. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. And then, as if the silence itself cracked, Verena leaned slightly toward me. Her voice was velvet, sharp enough to cut. "You shouldn't have come." The words weren't loud. They weren't even meant for everyone. But I heard them, and my skin prickled. Before I could respond, before I could even catch my breath, a voice broke through the tension. My cousin Malcolm, sitting near the middle of the table, his fork hovering in midair, his face pale. "Wait," he blurted, staring at me. "Did you get the letter too?" I froze when Malcolm said it. The words rattled in my head like loose change in an empty jar. "Did you get the letter too?" Letter? I stared at him, my hands tightening into fists at my sides. My lips moved, but no sound came out. I tried to form the word, "what," but it caught in my throat. Everyone was watching me, waiting for me to respond, and all I could do was blink. I never got a letter. I felt my heartbeat in my ears, a steady pounding that drowned out the clatter of silverware and the hum of conversation that had restarted in low, nervous tones around me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers right there at the table, but I couldn't move. Instead, I was pulled backward into memory, yanked down a tunnel of time. When I was 13 and my mom was gone, my father sat me down in the kitchen. His face was hard, his jaw set, his eyes red like he hadn't slept. I asked him the question I'd been asking since I found the note on the counter. Where did she go? He exhaled, long and tired, like I was a burden for even asking. She left us, Jory. She ran away with another man. That's who she was. That's who she chose to be. And if you're smart, you'll stop waiting for her to come back. It gutted me. I believed him. I believed she had abandoned me because I wasn't enough. For years, I carried that shame like a backpack filled with bricks. But now Malcolm's words cracked the foundation of everything I thought I knew. A letter? What letter? I looked at him across the table. His face was pale, his fork trembling slightly in his hand. He knew something. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Malcolm, I said, the name tasting foreign after so many years. What letter? His lips parted, but before he could answer, Verena's gaze sliced across the table like a knife. That smirk again, faint but poisonous. Her fingers traced the stem of her wine glass, casual, like she owned the silence. Malcolm faltered. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes darting between me and her. That silence stretched, sticky, unbearable. And then my father coughed, drawing all eyes back to him. He set his fork down carefully, too carefully, as though he needed his hands free. His voice cracked when he spoke. Jory, maybe this isn't the right time. I blinked at him, my chest tightening. That was not a denial. That was not anger. That was something else. Something guilty. My father never looked guilty. He always looked stern, firm, unshaken. But now the corners of his mouth trembled. His eyes glistened with something like fear. My world tilted. Dad, I whispered, leaning forward slightly. You told me she left, that she ran off with someone. Was that true? The words felt dangerous, like walking on a frozen lake and hearing the ice crack beneath my feet. His jaw clenched, his hands pressed flat to the table. For a moment, he looked like he might answer me. He looked like a man cornered, forced to finally confess something he had buried. But then Verena leaned closer to him, her hand brushing against his sleeve. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped once, lightly on his wrist. And just like that, the air shifted. His back straightened, his expression hardened, and the guilty flicker was gone. But I had seen it, and I would never forget. I think, Verena said smoothly, her voice dripping sugar, we've had enough of this melodrama. Thanksgiving is not the time for digging into old wounds. Her smile widened as she glanced at me, all teeth, no warmth. But I wasn't letting it go. Not now. Not after 12 years of silence. What letter? I demanded, louder this time. The cousins down the table stopped their side conversations. Clayton's fork froze midway to his mouth. Even the TV in the living room seemed quieter. I didn't care if I ruined Thanksgiving. It was already ruined. My childhood had been ruined. My life had been carved apart by lies and half-truths. Malcolm shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. He looked like he wanted to vanish into the wallpaper. I don't know much, he stammered, eyes flicking again to Verena, then back to me. Just that. Malcolm, Verena interrupted, her voice sharp now. Eat your dinner. His cheeks flushed, his mouth closed. He stabbed at his mashed potatoes like a scolded child. Rage bubbled in my chest. She was controlling the narrative, just like she always had. Twisting people, silencing them. And my father let her. I turned back to him. Dad, please, did Mom leave me something? Did she write to me? For a second, just a second, his lips trembled. His eyes darted downward. And in that second, I knew. He knew something. But before I could press him further, Verena slammed her wine glass down against the table. Red liquid splashed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Her eyes locked onto mine, blazing now, the mask slipping. Don't! She hissed, her voice low and venomous. Don't start digging into the past. I felt the silence at that table like a weight pressing on my chest. Nobody reached for their plates. Nobody tried to make small talk. It was as if my words, my question about the letter about Mom, had split the family right down the middle. On one side, I could feel the sharp stares, the whispered judgment. On the other, the ones who couldn't even meet my eyes. Their glances darted to their food, their hands, anywhere but me. It was all too familiar. That same hush from years ago whenever I dared to ask about her. That same shame settling heavy in my stomach, reminding me of the girl who had been shoved into silence. The clink of silverware finally broke through, deliberate and mocking. Clayton leaned back in his chair, his fork dangling loosely between his fingers. His grin spread slow, arrogant, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying across the room. "Look who crawled back in from nowhere. Thought you'd show up and play detective? You've been gone for years, Jory. Nobody missed you. You're like some charity case that shows up at the door expecting a warm welcome." The word stung more than I wanted to admit. He knew exactly where to jab. He always did. I saw the smirk tug at Verena's lips, just faint enough to pass as nothing. My father's hand gripped his fork, so tightly his knuckles whitened, but he didn't say a word. I laughed softly, bitterly. "Charity case? That's funny coming from you, Clayton. I didn't need this family's money. I built my own life. I worked, I scraped, I survived. Can you say the same, or are you still riding Mommy's coattails?" His face flushed crimson, but he chuckled like it didn't matter. At least my mother stuck around. The words hit me like a slap. My breath caught, but I forced my shoulders back. "Don't you dare." "Why not?" His smirk widened. "Truth hurts, doesn't it? She ran, Jory. She left you, and everyone here knows it. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you'll stop embarrassing yourself." My father shifted, his mouth twitching as if he wanted to interrupt, but once again he stayed quiet, just like always. I turned to him. "Dad, you're going to let him talk to me like that? After everything?" He avoided my gaze, staring down at his plate as though the turkey and gravy were suddenly the most important things in the world. The betrayal dug deep. Not just tonight, but years of it piling on top of each other. The sound of Clayton's laugh when he locked me out in the cold. The way Verena smirked when I cried over the quilt my grandmother made. My father watching in silence while I crumbled. And then one memory, sharp as glass, cut through them all. I was 16, standing outside my father's office door. The voices inside were low, hushed, but the anger in them carried. I pushed the door open just enough to see Verena at his desk, rifling through a folder. My heart dropped when I saw the envelope, my college fund, the money my mother had worked extra shifts to save for me. "This will cover the bills," Verena said, her voice smooth. "Verena," my father muttered, "that money is for Jory." She looked at him, her eyes flashing. "Randall, do you want this house or not? Do you want creditors hounding us? She can figure it out on her own. Kids do." He hesitated, then lowered his head. "Fine." My breath hitched. I stumbled back, tears blurring my vision, but I didn't make a sound. I knew then that they had chosen each other over me. My future, my mother's sacrifice, it all meant nothing to them. That night, I cried into my pillow until my chest hurt, vowing I'd never forgive them. And now here I was, sitting across the same table, their eyes still trying to erase me. I felt the heat rising in my chest as Clayton's laughter faded, as the relatives around the table shifted uncomfortably, some whispering to each other, others just stabbing at their food to avoid the tension. I turned to my father, really looking at him. His hair was grayer now, his shoulders more slouched, but the silence was the same silence that had followed me like a shadow since the night Mom disappeared. I leaned forward, my voice low but clear, cutting through the room. "Tell them I said, locking my eyes on him. Tell them what you did to Mom, or I will. The table went dead still. I was 13 the night everything shattered. 13. Sitting on the edge of my bed with my heart pounding so loud I thought it might echo through the walls. The house was quiet in that strange, heavy way, the kind of silence that comes after an argument, but before the storm is really over. Then I heard it, the muffled voices downstairs. At first it was just low murmurs, sharp edges of words I couldn't catch. Then louder, her voice breaking through the walls. My mother. She was crying, not the soft, tired kind of crying I'd heard before when she thought nobody was watching, but the jagged, desperate kind that carried pain. Randall, please, just listen to me, she begged, her voice trembling. I crept to my door, pressing my ear against the wood. His reply was low, controlled, but I caught pieces. You're being irrational. This isn't what you think. Then a thud, like something hitting the wall. My stomach flipped. Don't you dare lie to me, she screamed. The sound cut straight into me, made my legs shake. And then silence. For a second, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe she'd calmed down. But then came the slam. The door downstairs cracked against its frame, so hard the windows in my room rattled. Footsteps, quick, uneven, retreating into the night. I ran to the window, pulling the curtain back just in time to see her figure disappear down the driveway, the porch light casting her shadow long and thin across the gravel. No coat, no suitcase, just gone. I waited for him to go after her. I waited for the sound of the door opening again, for his voice calling her back. But the house stayed still. I pressed my face to the glass until my breath fogged it up, until the dark swallowed everything. That was the night she vanished. And that was the night I stopped believing my father would ever protect me. Now, sitting at the Thanksgiving table all these years later, his face across from me, the memory was so sharp it made my chest ache. His fork scraped against his plate, metal against porcelain, like he could just drown it out with noise. Don't twist this, Jory, he said flatly, his voice thin, strained. You were young. You don't remember things right. Your mother, she left. That's the truth. The truth. The same line he had fed me for 12 years. The same story repeated until even he had started to believe it. But I remembered every sound of that night. Every scream. Every slammed door. Every second of that silence afterward. You expect me to believe she just walked away? I asked, my throat tight, my hands trembling against the edge of the table. She did, he said firmly, but his eyes darted, sideways, not straight at me. And that's when I saw it. Verena's hand sliding across the table, her fingers curling over his, squeezing too tight. His knuckles turned pale under her grip. It wasn't comfort. It was control. Her smile was faint, but her eyes locked on mine, cold and unflinching, daring me to push further. I leaned back, the weight of her gaze pressing on me like a stone. And for a flicker of a moment, I felt 13 again, alone, trapped, nobody on my side. But then I looked around the table. The others avoided my eyes, shifting in their seats, pretending to be interested in their mashed potatoes, their wine, their phones. Anything but this. And I realized I wasn't just fighting for the truth. I was fighting against years of silence, against the story they'd all let themselves accept because it was easier than questioning him. My voice cracked, but I forced it out anyway. Viewers, if you're hearing this, I want you to think about something. Would you forgive a father who chose his new wife over his daughter? The question hung in the air like smoke, curling through the room, impossible to ignore. Randall's jaw tightened. That's enough, he muttered, but his voice was weak. I could feel the pulse in my temple, the fire in my chest. Enough wasn't enough. I swallowed hard, then leaned forward, my voice low but steady. You want to know why I came back? Why am I not afraid of you anymore? The table shifted. Forks stopped. Glasses stilled midair. Even Clayton's smirk faltered. I let the words drop, sharp and heavy, because I found Mom's bracelet, buried in the backyard. The room went still. The sound of forks hitting plates, the sharp inhale of gasps around the table. It was almost satisfying. For once, the silence wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. The weight of what I had just said pressed down on everyone, thick and heavy, impossible to ignore. Across from me, Verena's smile cracked. The mask she'd worn since the moment I walked into this house slipped just enough for me to see the truth. Her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed, and for the first time that night, she didn't look untouchable. She looked rattled. My father's gaze flickered, first to me, then to her. His confusion seemed real, or maybe it was guilt. Either way, his hand twitched beneath the table, like he wanted to speak, but didn't know which side he was on anymore. "You're lying," Verena finally whispered, but the edge in her voice gave her away. She had never whispered anything in her life. She snapped. She hissed. She controlled every room she entered. But now, she was rattling like glass about to shatter. "I'm not lying," I said, steadying my voice even as my chest burned. "I went back last month. To the house. I stood in the yard, the one where you used to make me rake leaves until my fingers blistered. I dug near the garden bed, the one Mom always kept for tulips." My throat tightened at the memory. My hands had been trembling that day as I knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds away. I hadn't expected to find anything. I just wanted to be closer to her. But then my fingers brushed against something cold. I pulled, the soil breaking apart, and there it was. Her bracelet. The same silver chain with the heart charm she wore every day of my life. I used to trace it with my fingertips when she tucked me into bed. I used to hear the faint jingle of it when she stirred spaghetti sauce or folded laundry. That bracelet wasn't just jewelry. It was proof she had been there. Proof she hadn't just vanished into thin air like Verena and my father always claimed. And it was buried in our backyard. I looked Verena dead in the eye. You can tell everyone she ran. You can pretend she left us. But explain this. Why would Mom's bracelet be hidden under dirt unless someone wanted to make sure no one found it? The table shifted with uneasy energy. My cousin fidgeted with her napkin. My aunt glanced nervously at Randall. Clayton smirked like this was all some bad reality show staged for his entertainment. But Verena, she just stared, and that stare carried years of venom. Years of her words still echoing in my head. I couldn't stop the memory from slamming into me. I was 15, sitting at the vanity in her bedroom, fumbling with lip gloss. I'd wanted to look nice for the school dance, wanted to fit in just once. Verena walked in, her glass of wine half empty, her voice dripping with that sick sweetness she reserved only for moments when she wanted to hurt me most. "Trying to make yourself pretty?" she asked, glancing at me in the mirror. I swallowed, nodding slightly. "It's the winter formal." Her smile widened, cruel and sharp. "Jory, you're wasting your time. You're too plain to ever be loved. Boys don't look twice at girls like you. Better to stop trying before you embarrass yourself." The sting of those words had clung to me for years, wrapping around my ribs like chains. I remembered standing there, the lip gloss trembling in my hand, fighting the tears I refused to let her see. She thrived on tears. She collected them like trophies. I blinked back to the present, staring across the table at the same woman who had made my life a cage. "Too plain, huh?" I whispered, more to myself than to her. "You never thought I'd find the strength to come back. You never thought I'd find anything." Her face hardened, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the truth in her silence. But before I could press her further, a sound cut through the room. "Clayton!" laughing. It wasn't light-hearted or nervous. It was cruel, sharp, meant to slice through everything I had just said. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as if the whole thing was some big joke. "God, this is pathetic," he sneered. "You dig up a trinket and think you've solved some mystery? You don't know half of it." I froze. His grin widened. "Go ahead," he said, looking straight at me, then at Verena. "Tell her, Mom. Tell her what you told us about the insurance money." The words insurance money clung to the air like smoke, thick and impossible to breathe through. My chest tightened as I stared at Clayton's smug face. He leaned back, arms crossed, waiting for the bomb to land. Verena's hand twitched around her wineglass. My father looked pale, almost sick. I forced my voice to steady, though every muscle in me wanted to shake. "What insurance money?" No one answered right away. My cousin's fork clattered against her plate. My aunt's lips parted, but she said nothing. All eyes fell on Randall. My father, the man who had sworn to protect me, who had sworn to honor the family Mom built before it all shattered. He shifted in his seat, rubbed his jaw, and for the first time all night he couldn't meet my eyes. "Dad," I pressed, my voice sharp now, demanding. "What insurance money?" It was Verena who spoke first, her tone too casual, too slick, the way snakes might sound if they could talk. "Don't act surprised, Jory. Adults make adult decisions. Your mother had a policy, and after she disappeared, it was paid out. It was our responsibility to use it wisely." My ears rang. My pulse hammered, so loud I thought the whole table could hear it. Disappeared? She vanished, and instead of looking for her, instead of asking questions, you cashed in. Randall swallowed hard. His lips parted, but Verena cut him off with a hand on his arm, digging her nails into his sleeve as if reminding him who owned his voice. He flinched, just slightly, but enough for me to see it. I turned my gaze on him. "How much?" The silence stretched. Then he muttered, barely above a whisper, 300,000. The room spun. $300,000. My throat closed as if I were drowning in numbers, in betrayal, in the sheer audacity of it. Verena didn't even flinch. We did what was necessary. Clayton needed a future. He was accepted into Crestfield Academy, and opportunities like that don't wait. And my boutique was an investment in our family's future. What else were we supposed to do? Leave the money sitting there? I almost laughed. Almost. But the sound that came out was closer to a choke. That money was Mom's life, her safety net, her years of working double shifts at the hospital. And you, I turned to Randall, my eyes burning. You let her use it like a piggy bank. His head hung low, and for a flicker of a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, there was guilt in his eyes. His lips trembled as he spoke. "I thought it was best. Jory, I didn't know what else to do. We couldn't afford the mortgage, not after," his voice cracked. "I thought it was best for everyone." Best. The word stabbed me like a knife. Best for everyone. For who? I stood, my chair screeching against the hardwood. My hands pressed flat against the table, shaking, my fingernails digging into the polished wood. I looked around the room, making sure every single person heard me, making sure my voice carried the weight of 12 years of silence and pain. Best for who? I demanded. For Clayton? For Verena? For your new family? Because Mom isn't dead. Gasps erupted around the table. My cousin clapped a hand over her mouth. My aunt muttered a prayer under her breath. Even Randall's head jerked up, his eyes wide, glassy, torn between fear and disbelief. And Verena froze, the glass in her hand trembling for the first time all night. Mom isn't dead. The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. My own voice echoed in my ears. and for a moment I almost wondered if I'd said them aloud at all. The room went still. Forks froze midair. Chewing stopped. Even the faint hum of the furnace seemed to falter. It was Clayton who finally broke the silence, his voice dripping with mockery. "Did you hit your head on the way here, Jory? You've lost it." He laughed once, sharp and cruel, but no one joined him. Not this time. "Mom isn't dead," my cousin Rebecca repeated softly, eyes darting from me to Randall. She looked like she wanted to believe it, like she'd been holding a question in her heart for years, but never dared speak it. Randall's face went pale, his jaw tightening as though he'd been sucker punched. His hands trembled on the table. "Jory," he said slowly, like he was weighing every syllable. Don't do this." But I couldn't stop now. My voice shook, but the truth burned too hot to stay hidden any longer. I was in Rhode Island last month. I went to St. Luke's Hospital. My eyes swept across the table, locking on Randall's. A nurse saw my last name on the intake sheet. She leaned in close and whispered to me, "We had a patient here once." Her name was Helena Ellison. A collective gasp shuddered around the table. Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. My aunt's fork clattered onto her plate. I could still see the nurse's face in my memory, her kind eyes darting side to side, her voice low, like she knew she wasn't supposed to say a thing. She'd pressed a hand to mine. "She was here years ago, sweetheart." Fragile, confused. We weren't allowed to share details. But Helena Ellison, I'll never forget that name. At the time, I'd sat in my car afterward for over an hour, shaking, clutching the steering wheel, wondering if I was losing my mind. But that whisper had carved into me like a blade. Mom wasn't a ghost. She wasn't ashes scattered in some secret place. She had been flesh, blood, breath. Alive. Now, standing at that table, I let the weight of it settle over them. Clayton rolled his eyes, trying to claw back control. "So what? A nurse remembered a name? Helena isn't exactly rare. Could have been anyone. You're reaching." But his voice cracked and I caught it. For all his smugness, even he wasn't entirely sure. "Reaching." I shot back. "Then explain this. Why was her bracelet buried in our backyard? Why did you take her insurance payout as if she'd been declared dead? And why does every time I look at Dad, he can't keep his eyes on mine?" Randall flinched. Verena's hand snapped out, gripping his arm so tight the tendons in her wrist bulged. Her nails dug in, and I swore I saw him wince. "Stop!" she hissed, her voice low, but sharp enough to slice the room in half. "This family has had enough. Don't dig up ghosts that don't exist." I laughed bitterly. "Ghosts? You mean the ones you buried along with the truth?" For the first time since I arrived, Verena's mask slipped. Her smile was gone. Her lips curled back, her eyes flashing. And underneath all that false polish and charm, there was something raw, something dangerous. Randall tried again, his voice barely a whisper. "Jory, maybe we should talk privately. This isn't the time." I slammed my palm on the table, the sound cracking through the room like thunder. "No, this is exactly the time. They all need to hear it. Everyone who's been fed lies for 12 years deserves to know." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loud. My cousin's hands shook in her lap. My aunt's lips moved in a silent prayer. Clayton looked like he wanted to laugh again, but couldn't find the air. I could feel my own heart pounding in my throat. But there was no going back. I looked directly into the camera of their stares. Every family member frozen, like an audience waiting for a verdict. Viewers, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them here, in front of everyone, like I just did? Or would you have waited until the lies were whispered to you in private? The question wasn't really for them. It was for the people who would hear my story later, who would feel this rage boiling in their own chests, who would decide if I was reckless or brave. Before anyone could answer, before Randall could mutter another excuse or Verena could paste her smile back on, the air shifted. Verena shoved her chair back so hard it screeched across the floor. She shot up, her wine glass rattling, red liquid sloshing onto the pristine white tablecloth. Her eyes burned into me, and for the first time in 12 years I saw her lose control. She didn't say a word. She just turned on her heel, storming out of the dining room. The sound of her heels striking the floor echoed like a metronome of fury. And then the front door slammed so hard the chandelier trembled overhead. The door slammed so hard behind Verena the glass panes rattled in their frames. For a second, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I felt every eye in that dining room pressing down on me. But I couldn't stay there. My chest was tight, my pulse hammering in my ears. I pushed my chair back and followed her out into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap. The fall wind smelled of smoke and wet leaves. The moon hung low, a sharp crescent slicing through thin clouds, lighting up the yard in silver streaks. Verena was already halfway across the lawn, her heels sinking into the damp grass, her shoulders stiff with fury. I followed the sound of her steps until she stopped by the fire pit near the edge of the yard. She turned slowly, her eyes glowing in the weak firelight that flickered from the embers left earlier. The flames crackled, sending up bursts of sparks. Her face was no longer the carefully painted mask she'd worn inside. Her lipstick had smeared at the corner of her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked feral. "You had no right," she hissed, her voice cutting through the night like glass on stone. "No right to dredge this up." I folded my arms, though my fingers were shaking. I had every right. She was my mother, not yours, not his, mine. Something flickered across her face, something almost human. She stepped closer, her breath warm against the cold air. "You think you're owed the truth, Jory? You think you can handle it?" Her jaw clenched, then loosened, and suddenly her tone shifted, softer, almost conspiratorial. "She begged me not to tell you. Do you understand that? Your mother," she asked me, "said she didn't want you growing up resenting her." The words landed heavy in my chest. For a moment I faltered. I saw flashes of my mom in my mind, her voice singing softly while she brushed my hair, her laughter bubbling in the kitchen as she wiped flour from my nose. Could it be true? Could she have chosen silence to protect me? I shook my head hard, as if to fling away the image before it could root in me. No, that doesn't make sense. Why would she let me believe she was dead? Why would she let you raise me like I didn't matter? Verena's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite a snarl. Because she thought it was best. You don't understand the choices adults make for their children. Sacrifices. Her hand brushed through her hair, fingers trembling. She said if you knew the truth, you'd hate her, that you'd never forgive her for leaving. I swallowed hard. The fire popped loudly, making me jump. For the briefest second, I almost believed her. Almost. There was something in her eyes that rang with conviction, like she'd rehearsed these words 100 times for this very moment. But then she made a mistake. Her voice dropped low, venom seeping back in. She signed everything over to us before she disappeared. The night split open. My breath caught in my throat. My mother, who I had been told was gone forever, not only alive, but leaving behind a paper trail, signing everything over to them? The flames crackled, and the shadows danced across Verena's face. She froze, realizing what she'd just revealed. But it was too late. Her slip hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. The firelight painted Verena's face in jagged lines, her cheekbones sharp, her eyes glowing like an animal cornered. Her words echoed in my ears. She signed everything over to us before she disappeared. I stood frozen, the night air slicing through me, but inside I was burning. It clicked in one brutal flash. This wasn't some tragic accident, wasn't some noble sacrifice my mother had made. This was a setup, and Verena had been pulling the strings all along. I stared at her, trying to read past the veneer of control she always wore like armor. Her breath was shaky now, her hands trembling though she tried to hide it. For the first time I saw the truth. She wasn't protecting me, she was protecting herself. "You did this," I whispered, the words tasting like blood on my tongue. "You orchestrated everything. You manipulated her. You cornered her until she had no choice." Her eyes flickered. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. And then I saw it, guilt, raw and exposed, a crack in her mask. "You convinced Randall to claim that insurance money," I pressed, my voice gaining strength with every word. $300,000. My mother's life boiled down to a payout, and you spent it like blood money. On Clayton. On yourself. Her lips curled into a defiant sneer, but the hesitation before it betrayed her. "You don't know what you're talking about," she spat. "You were a child. You didn't see what she was. Weak. Selfish. She wanted to leave you, Jory. I just made it easier for her." The venom in her tone dragged me backward through years of memories I'd buried deep but never forgotten. One burned brightest. I was maybe 10, maybe 11. Christmas Eve. Snow piled high against the windows. I'd talked back, something small, like saying she wasn't my mother when she demanded I call her mom. Randall had been in the other room. Silent, always silent, and Verena had grabbed me by the arm and shoved me outside into the freezing night. I remembered the sting of cold biting my cheeks, the way my breath crystallized in the air. I'd pounded on the door with my fists until they went numb, begging to be let back in. I could hear laughter inside, Clayton unwrapping an early gift, Verena praising him, her voice dripping with pride. And me? I stood alone on the porch, my teeth chattering, tears freezing on my face, wondering what I'd done so wrong to deserve being shut out. I had promised myself I'd never feel that helpless again, but standing by the fire pit, staring at the woman who had stolen everything, I felt the same ache in my chest, the same rage clawing its way up my throat. "You locked me out that night," I said, my voice low but shaking. "Do you remember? In the snow. You called me weak, just like you're calling her, just like you've called everyone who didn't bow to you." For a flicker of a second, I thought I saw doubt cross her face, maybe even fear. But then a sharp laugh rang out from behind me, slicing through the tension like a knife. I spun, and there he was, Clayton, leaning casually against the porch railing, arms folded, smirk plastered across his face. His shadow stretched long across the lawn, the faint glow from the kitchen window lighting his arrogant grin. He'd heard every word. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Guess it's true, then. Mom always said you were weak." The words hit me harder than the winter air ever had. I stood caught between the monster who had destroyed my family and the boy who had grown into her perfect echo. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I realized in that moment I wasn't just fighting Verena. I was fighting every single one of them. And the worst part, they weren't done yet. Randall's voice cut through the thick night like a fragile thread, soft and worn, the kind of tone I remembered from years ago when he used to tuck me in. "Enough," he said, holding up his hand as if he could physically press down the chaos swirling around us. His voice cracked on the word, and for a moment, just a moment, he didn't sound like Verena's puppet or Clayton's enabler. He sounded like my father. Let's all go inside, he murmured, glancing between us. His eyes lingered on me longer than they should have, searching my face the way someone searches for a piece of themselves they lost a long time ago. We can sit. We can talk. Like family. The word family felt jagged, sharp in my chest. Family hadn't been safe for me in over a decade. But still, I felt that old reflex tugging inside me. The desperate little girl who wanted her father to protect her, to choose her, to prove she mattered. I should have known better by now. And yet my feet hesitated. He opened the door, ushering us back toward the dining room as if we hadn't just been tearing each other apart by the fire pit. The warmth of the house wrapped around me like false comfort. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie still lingered. Untouched plates still spread across the long mahogany table, but the atmosphere was poisoned. Randall gestured for me to sit. His hand even hovered over the back of the chair beside him, as though he wanted me close, as though he meant it. His face looked softer in the glow of the chandelier, lines etched deeper around his mouth, his hair more silver than I remembered. He looked tired, and was it guilt? Or was I imagining it? I sat slowly, my heartbeat thudding, so loud I could barely hear the scrape of chairs around me. For one fleeting breath, I let myself think, maybe, just maybe, this was the moment he would finally stand up for me. He cleared his throat. "Marjorie," he began, and my name from his lips almost broke me. "We've all said things tonight we shouldn't have. Maybe," his gaze shifted briefly to Verena, then back to me. "Maybe it's time we stopped tearing each other down. I know things weren't perfect after your mother left, but—" "After she left?" I cut in, my voice trembling but sharp. "That's still your story? After everything I just said, that's what you're clinging to?" His jaw flexed. He faltered, but only for a second before Verena's hand slid across his, squeezing tight like a leash. I watched his spine straighten, watched the softness drain out of his eyes. "Enough," he said again, but this time there was steel in it. His voice was firmer, rehearsed. This is not the way to handle things, Jory. You can't come storming back here after 12 years and drag our family's name through the mud. Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. Our family's name. Not my pain. Not the truth. Dignity before honesty. It always was. You expect me to stay quiet, I said slowly, after finding Mom's bracelet buried in the yard, after learning about the insurance, after everything she put me through. My voice cracked as I jerked my chin toward Verena, who sat smug, lips curling into the faintest smile. Randall's eyes flinched, but he didn't deny it. He just lowered his tone, gentle again, but laced with command. For the family's dignity, Marjorie, please, don't air dirty laundry where it doesn't belong. It will destroy us all. Something in me broke, cleanly in half. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't even protecting Mom's memory. He was protecting her, Verena. He always had. My pulse raced so fast I thought I might collapse. But instead I leaned forward, my voice barely above a whisper, every syllable cutting sharp through the tension. "Then I'll show them the photos." The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Breaths caught. Even Verena's smirk faltered, her hand tightening over Randall's as though to strangle the blood out of it. And in that silence I felt it, the shift. The control wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. The air around the table thickened the second the words left my mouth. Photos. They didn't know what kind. They didn't know how much I had, or how long I'd been holding them like weapons in my back pocket. And that was the beauty of it, the fear of the unknown. My hand shook under the table, but I forced myself to keep my face still, calm, almost casual. I slipped my phone from my bag slowly, deliberately, the way you might slide a knife across a countertop. All eyes were on me, the only sound the faint crackle of the fireplace behind us. "I didn't just come here empty-handed," I said, my voice low, my words steady though my chest felt like it was about to explode. I knew you'd try to twist this, to make me look crazy, ungrateful, vindictive. So I brought proof. I unlocked my phone, pulled up the folder I'd hidden deep within, and set it flat on the table, the glow illuminating every shocked and curious face around me. The first image, a photo of Mom's silver bracelet, dirt still clinging to the clasp, taken the night I dug it up behind the shed. Gasps sliced through the silence, like glass breaking. My cousin Malcolm actually covered his mouth. Aunt Corinne's fork clattered against her plate. Even some of the ones who had been avoiding my eyes all night leaned closer now, whispering. I swiped again. Another photo appeared. This one, a scanned copy of hospital paperwork, a record from a facility in Rhode Island. Name, Helena Ellison. Admission date, years after she was supposed to have disappeared. It was like the ground shifted beneath us all. I could feel the tremor move through the room. This isn't made up, I pressed, my words cutting through the murmurs. It's not some story I invented to ruin Thanksgiving. I found her name, her records. I held the bracelet in my hand. My mother didn't just vanish. She was still alive, and someone wanted her erased. Randall's face drained of color. He didn't speak. He didn't deny. He didn't even blink for a long moment. And that silence said more than words ever could. Did he know? Had he known all along? The thought twisted in my stomach like a knife. Because if he had lived with me all these years, pretending she was gone while hiding the truth, it wasn't just Verena's betrayal. It was his too. Verena tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and for the first time that night, her smile slipped completely. She looked less like the perfect wife she played in public and more like the woman I'd always seen behind closed doors. Cold, cornered, vicious. "What kind of game is this?" she hissed, her voice too sharp, too desperate. "You think a few scraps of paper prove anything? Anyone can forge records. Anyone can dig up trash in the backyard and claim it means something." But the way her eyes darted, the way her hand squeezed tighter around her wine glass, it gave her away. She was rattled, terrified. Randall finally spoke, his voice so faint I almost didn't catch it. "Marjorie!" He stopped, rubbed a hand over his face, and tried again. "Where did you get these?" I wanted to scream at him. "That's what you care about? Where? Not why. Not how long." My throat ached with the force of what I didn't say. "You tell me." I shot back, my voice trembling with restrained rage. "Did you know? Did you know she was alive? Did you bury her bracelet behind our house and pretend you didn't see me, crying myself to sleep for years?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And in that hesitation, in that unbearable pause, the room shifted once more. Some relatives looked horrified. Others looked away, as though they'd seen this moment coming all along, but had chosen to keep quiet. And then Aunt Corinne broke. Her voice was high, sharp, and full of something I couldn't place. Fear, maybe, or anger, or both. She slammed her hand on the table, rattling glasses. "If the truth comes out," she blurted, glaring at Randall, "you'll lose everything." The words hung in the air like smoke. Everything. What everything? And in that single second, I knew I wasn't even close to the bottom of this. I stared at Aunt Corinne, her words still echoing in the air like a gunshot. "If the truth comes out, you'll lose everything." The room seemed to tilt, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was standing or sitting, breathing or choking. My father's face was gray, his jaw tight, his hand trembling ever so slightly as it clutched the tablecloth. Verena, though, had gone eerily still, her lips curled into the faintest smirk, as though Corinne had just said out loud what she'd been thinking all along. I pushed my phone closer across the table, daring Randall to look at the photos again. Lose everything? What exactly is it that you stand to lose, Dad? Money? Reputation? Or the last shred of respect I ever had for you? His shoulders sagged as though the weight of 12 years of secrets had finally landed squarely on his back. He rubbed his temple slowly, then looked at me with eyes that weren't angry anymore. They were tired, beaten down, cornered. Verena, his voice cracked. He cleared it. She made me sign the documents. I didn't want to at first. She told me it was the only way to protect the family. She said Helena, your mother, wanted it that way. And he shut his eyes, shaking his head. I went along with it. The gasp that rose from the table was sharp enough to cut through bone. My heart thundered in my ears. He said it, but then his voice dropped lower, and the words that followed hit harder than any slap Verena had ever delivered. I didn't just sign because she pushed me, he admitted. I spent the money too. All of it. The insurance, the savings, every dime. I knew it wasn't right, but I told myself I deserved it. I told myself we deserved a new start. For a second, the room spun. All the air left my lungs. He had said it like it was an afterthought, like he was talking about loose change, not the life of the woman who had raised me, not the future he stole from me. You spent it. My voice cracked, but I didn't care anymore. You let Verena erase Mom. You let her steal her name, her memory, and then you spent her life away? On what? He wouldn't look at me. He stared down at the polished wood table like it might swallow him whole. And then, like vultures circling, the rest of the family started to murmur. She has a point, Malcolm muttered from the end of the table. You don't understand. Aunt Corinne snapped back, clutching her wine glass like it might keep her steady. Randall did what he had to do. Family comes first. Family. I cut her off, my chest burning hot. You call this family? The night before prom, I begged him for $50 so I could buy a dress. $50. He looked me in the eye and said he couldn't spare it, said I was ungrateful for even asking. Meanwhile, he was paying Clayton's private school tuition with my mother's life insurance. Clayton, sitting smug in his pressed shirt like a prince at a feast, snorted. You're still bitter about prom? God, Jory, you really are pathetic. Some people move on with their lives. My head snapped toward him, and I swear if looks could kill, his seat would have been empty. Move on. I spat. Your entire life, the school, the trips, even that stupid car you totaled when you were 19, was paid for with the blood of my mother. So don't tell me to move on. For once, he didn't have a comeback. He just leaned back, smirk fading, lips tight, his eyes darting to Verena as though waiting for her to rescue him. And Verena? She finally found her voice. Calm, smooth, poison wrapped in velvet. She's twisting everything. Randall did what any man would do. He provided for his children. He protected this family from ruin. Your mother, she wasn't strong enough for this world, Jory. You need to stop clinging to her like a ghost. The words landed like daggers. Not strong enough? I repeated slowly, my voice shaking. She was strong enough to survive years married to him, and years of you slithering in behind her back. Aunt Corinne hissed at me, watch your mouth. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had swallowed enough silence to choke me 10 times over. And now, here in this house, in this room, at this cursed table, everything was spilling out whether they wanted to hear it or not. You think you can rewrite history because you wore prettier dresses and smiled prettier lies. But I was there. I was the one who heard her crying behind closed doors. I was the one who saw him turn cold. And I was the one you tried to break every single day after she disappeared. My voice cracked again and my eyes stung, but I didn't care. For the first time, I felt the tide shift. Some faces were hard, Corinne, Clayton, Verena. But others? Malcolm, my cousin Ellie, even my Uncle Darren. They looked at me with something different now. Sympathy, recognition, maybe even belief. The room was split, just like I knew it would be. Randall shifted uncomfortably. Marjorie, please. No. I cut him off, standing so fast my chair screeched against the hardwood floor. My legs shook, but I stood tall, staring at each of them one by one. I am done begging. I am done waiting for scraps of the truth. You think you buried Mom's story with her bracelet? You think you bought my silence with your lies and Clayton's shiny education? No, I came here tonight for one reason. The silence was deafening. Every eye was on me. Even the fireplace seemed to burn lower, waiting for what I would say next. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice, steadying the fire that burned so deep inside me it felt like it might tear me apart. Then I'll finish what Mom started. I stood there, my hands pressed flat against the table, my heart racing so hard I swore they could hear it pounding in my chest. Their eyes were on me, hungry, confused, angry, afraid. They didn't know what was coming, not yet. But I did. I had planned this moment for months, down to the last detail. Every sneer from Clayton, every cold silence from Randall, every poisoned word from Verena, it had all fueled me to get here. I let the silence drag on longer than anyone could stand. Even the clock on the mantel ticked too loudly, reminding us all that time was running out. Randall shifted in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck like a guilty man waiting for a sentence. Verena crossed her arms and tilted her chin up, her confidence still painted on her face like it was permanent ink. Clayton rolled his eyes as if this was another one of my tantrums. I finally leaned forward and spoke. My voice was steady, low, deliberate. You all think you've won. You think I came here tonight to scream and cry and storm out like before. But I didn't. I came because I've already made my move. That got their attention. Clayton stopped smirking. Randall's head jerked up. Even Verena's jaw tightened ever so, slightly, though she tried to hide it. I filed a petition with probate court last week, I said. The documents, the transfers, the accounts, everything you've been hiding. It's all under review now. Randall's face drained of color, like the blood had just walked out of him. Verena laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that grated against the walls. You filed what? She mocked. Sweetheart, the court won't listen to you. You don't have a lawyer, you don't have money, and you certainly don't have evidence. All you've got are your little dramatics and that tired sob story about your mother. I smiled, and that smile, small and sharp, made her falter for the first time. Oh, Verena, I said softly. You think I'd walk in here without proof? You think I'd throw myself into the lion's den with nothing but words? No, I've been preparing for this longer than you've been lying. Randall spoke then, his voice rough and hoarse. Marjorie, please. You don't understand what you're playing with. The courts don't take kindly to false claims. You could ruin yourself. Ruin myself. I snapped, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. You already did that when you let her take everything from me. You ruined me when you told me I didn't deserve a dress for prom, when you made me feel like I was nothing while you gave Clayton the world on a platter. No, Dad, I'm not the one who should be worried about ruin. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Verena's hand slid across the table toward his, like she could still control him, still make him hers. But this time he pulled away, and for a second I almost pitied her. Almost. I took a step back from the table, pulling my phone from my pocket. They watched me carefully now, like wild animals realizing the prey they'd cornered wasn't afraid anymore, and maybe wasn't prey at all. You want to know the truth? I asked quietly, the truth none of you ever expected me to find. I swiped my thumb across the screen. My reflection in the glass was pale but steady, my eyes locked on theirs. I tracked her down. The silence that followed was deafening. Randall's chair creaked as he leaned forward, his face pale. Verena's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again, but no sound came. Clayton laughed nervously, shaking his head. You tracked who down? He asked, his voice cracking in the middle. My mother. The room seemed to collapse in on itself. The chandelier above swayed slightly, as if the whole house was holding its breath. That's impossible, Randall whispered, his voice thin. Is it? I shot back. Because I found her. Alive. She's been recovering in a care facility outside of Denver for the last 2 years. You didn't kill her with your lies, Verena. You just buried her where you thought no one would look. Gasps echoed from the corners of the table. My Uncle Darren swore under his breath. Ellie's hands flew to her mouth. Corinne's face went crimson, her eyes wide with something between disbelief and fury. Randall slumped back in his chair, his hand covering his mouth. He looked like a man who had just watched his whole life go up in flames. Verena tried to laugh. This is ridiculous, she sneered. She's bluffing. She probably found some poor woman to pretend, or she's hallucinating. There's no proof. None. You can't just throw around claims like this and expect. But I cut her off, raising my phone higher, my thumb hovering over the play button. You want proof? My voice shook, but not from fear, from power, from the weight of knowing I had finally cornered them. I have all the proof I need. Verena's smirk flickered. Randall's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, so tight his knuckles turned white. Clayton looked between us, lost, like a child who'd just realized his parents weren't invincible. I met each of their eyes in turn. Then I pressed play, and from the tiny speaker of my phone came a voice. Weak, raspy, but undeniable. This is Helena Ellison, and this is my story. The first words from her voice recording were enough to split the air open like a thunderclap. This is Helena Ellison, and this is my story. It wasn't just the words, it was the sound of her. My mother. Her voice carried years of exhaustion. The gravel of someone who had been beaten down but not destroyed. Weak, trembling, but steady enough to cut through the thick silence choking that room. Gasps rose like a wave crashing over the table. Someone's glass toppled, spilling wine across the white cloth, but no one moved to clean it. They were frozen, every pair of eyes locked on my phone as though it had become the very heart of the house. My mother's voice continued, halting but strong enough to land like blows against their carefully built lies. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I didn't walk away from my daughter. I was cornered, manipulated. Verena told me I was poison in Jory's life. She said Randall would be happier without me, that my daughter would be stronger if she hated me. And Randall, he didn't stop her. He didn't speak up. He let it happen. The room erupted. Shouts clashed over each other. A storm of disbelief and accusations. Clayton barked, "That's fake. She's dead," while Aunt Corinne clutched her pearls and whispered. Dear God, Uncle Darren slammed his palm against the table, demanding, "Randall, is this true?" Verena shot up from her chair, her face red, her composure cracking like porcelain under pressure. Lies. She's fabricating all of this. Jory found some old recording, some sick woman to play along. You're all fools if you think Helena is still alive. But her voice trembled, and for the first time, I saw real fear slip through her mask. I raised my hand, and they went silent, not because they respected me, but because they were terrified of what else was coming. My mother's voice, frail but unrelenting, filled the space again. They made me sign papers. Verena said it was the only way to protect Jory's future, but it was all a lie. They wanted the money. They wanted me gone. Randall, he said nothing. He turned his face away when I begged him to fight for us. I disappeared because I thought I had no choice, because I was told Jory would never forgive me. Her words dragged me back to every night I cried into my pillow, every birthday I blew out candles with a pit in my chest, every lie Randall and Verena fed me to make me believe my mother abandoned me willingly. And now, to hear her confess she hadn't left by choice, it didn't heal me. It burned. I scanned their faces, waiting for someone to deny it again. But even Clayton had gone pale. His mouth hung open, his fists clenching uselessly. Randall sat still, his eyes wide and wet, his lips trembling. He whispered something I almost didn't catch. She remembered. The recording continued, Helena's voice cracking. Jory, if you ever hear this, I never stopped loving you. They lied. They made you believe I chose them over you. But I would have chosen you every time. The words sliced me open, and I had to grip the table just to stay standing. For a second, my knees buckled under the weight of all those years of emptiness, now filled with a truth that hurt even more than the lies. The room had split into factions. Ellie's eyes brimmed with tears, whispering, "Poor child," while Darren shook his head at Randall with disgust. Corinne muttered something about shame, about how this could destroy the family name. And Verena! She stood rigid, hands trembling, eyes darting, calculating like a cornered animal searching for an escape. Then chaos truly broke loose. Darren yelled across the table, "You let her vanish? You let that woman manipulate all of us while your wife was alive." Corinne barked at him to shut his mouth, insisting we needed to think of the family's reputation. Clayton, red-faced, shoved his chair back and snarled at me, "You don't know what you've unleashed." But I wasn't looking at them anymore. My eyes were fixed on Randall. He hadn't moved. He hadn't defended himself. His face was pale, his hand trembling where it rested on the tablecloth. He looked broken in a way I had never seen before, like the lies he'd built his life on had finally caved in, crushing him under their weight. I stepped closer, my phone still playing my mother's shaky voice. "She begged you, didn't she? She begged you to stop Verena. And you said nothing." Randall blinked, tears spilling now. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The truth was written all over his face, plain as daylight. The betrayal hit me again, harder this time. He hadn't been powerless. He hadn't been tricked. He'd chosen silence, chosen comfort, chosen Verena, and by doing so, he had chosen to abandon me. "You weren't weak," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You were complicit." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Darren slammed his fist down again, yelling, "Answer her, Randall!" But Randall's body swayed in his chair. His hand clutched at his chest, his breathing sharp and ragged. At first, I thought it was more theatrics, another attempt to avoid accountability. But then his face contorted, and a strangled gasp escaped his throat. His chair scraped against the floor as he lurched forward, one hand clawing at the table, the other pressing hard over his heart. The room froze. Corinne screamed. Ellie shot to her feet. Randall collapsed, the weight of him crashing to the floor, gasps and shouts exploding around me. And all I could do was stand there, my mother's voice still echoing from my phone. Randall hit the ground with a sound I'll never forget, like the air being punched out of the world itself. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The shock of it froze us all in place, as if time itself had cracked in half. Then the room exploded into chaos. Corinne shrieked, her nails digging into her pearls. Darren scrambled to Randall's side, fumbling uselessly as if his shaking hands could hold life together. Ellie cried out for someone to call an ambulance, and even Clayton, red-faced and breathless, looked stunned, muttering, "Dad," under his breath, like a child who had just realized monsters were real. But Verena's reaction was the one that made my blood run cold. She bolted from her chair, dropping her mask completely. She didn't scream. She didn't comfort. She didn't kneel at Randall's side. She panicked, not for Randall, for herself. Her hands clawed at her hair as she paced, muttering, "No, no, no, this isn't happening. Not now, not like this." Her voice was higher, sharper, stripped of all that polished control she had worn like a crown for years. And when Darren shouted for her to help hold Randall steady, she shook her head violently. "I can't. Don't you see? If he goes, it all collapses. Everything collapses." Her words sliced through the noise, silencing us for just a moment. She wasn't afraid of losing her husband. She was afraid of losing her empire. The paramedics rushed in minutes later, though to me it felt like hours. The red and blue lights outside painted the walls in violent streaks, a warning flare to the whole neighborhood that something had cracked wide open inside our house. They checked Randall, their expressions grim but determined as they worked quickly to stabilize him. They hoisted him onto a stretcher, strapping him down as Corinne wailed about reputation, about whispers, about how this would look. Clayton shoved past me to follow, muttering that he wasn't leaving his father's side. Ellie hovered, torn between me and the chaos, before darting after them too. And then there was Verena. She lingered just long enough to place a trembling hand on Randall's arm as they wheeled him out. But her eyes weren't on him. They were darting, everywhere, calculating, like she was already rehearsing what lies she'd spin if this moment leaked outside these walls. She whispered something under her breath I couldn't quite catch, but the venom in her tone was unmistakable. When the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens wailed off into the night, the house fell into a silence so deep it pressed against my chest. Darren and Corinne stumbled out after them, Darren furious, Corinne still in her spiral of shame. And just like that, I was left at the head of the table, surrounded by the aftermath of truth detonated and lies collapsing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider in this house. I didn't feel like a guest in my own bloodline. I sat back down in my chair, deliberately, reclaiming the space that had been stolen from me since I was 13. The wine stains on the cloth, the overturned silverware, the half-eaten dishes, it all felt like a battlefield. And I wasn't leaving. Not this time. The silence pressed heavier until I broke it. My phone still rested in my hand. My mother's last words lingering in the back of my mind like a flame I refused to let go out. I looked across the table at the empty seats Verena and Randall had left behind, and I spoke into the void they left. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. And it wasn't, because tomorrow everything would change again. I reached into my bag, fingers brushing against the envelope I had carried with me, hidden until the right moment. Inside were documents stamped and signed. Proof that probate court would hear my petition in less than 24 hours. And more importantly, a confirmation that tomorrow Helena Ellison would walk into that courtroom herself. Alive, breathing, ready to speak. The thought of it sent a shiver down my spine. I pictured the looks on their faces. Clayton's denial cracking into ash, Corinne's obsession with reputation crumbling into dust, and Verena. God, Verena. I pictured her mask shattering into pieces when my mother appeared, flesh and blood. Undeniable proof that every lie she'd spun had a price tag she was about to pay. I wasn't naive, though. I knew Verena wouldn't let it happen quietly. She wasn't the type to wait for judgment. She was the type to rig the scales before the trial even began. And sure enough, as the house emptied and I sat alone at that cursed table, she returned. Not loudly, not with her usual commanding presence. She slipped back in through the side door like a shadow, her face pale, her composure cracked, but her eyes still burning with that dangerous gleam. She didn't scream this time. She didn't try to gaslight me or call me names. Instead, she leaned close enough that I could smell the bitter tang of the wine on her breath and hear the venom laced in her whisper. If she shows up tomorrow, I'll lose everything, she hissed. Her lips curled, her voice low and sharp like a blade. And so will you. The words coiled around me, heavy with a promise that chilled me deeper than any winter night. And in that moment, I knew the real battle hadn't even started yet. The morning sunlight crept into the house like it had no idea it was shining on a war zone. The curtains in the dining room glowed with a soft golden hue, the kind that should have made the space look warm, inviting, safe. But nothing about this house was safe. Not anymore. The chairs were still out of place from last night's chaos, the tablecloth still stained, the air still carrying the ghost of screams and whispers that had shattered everything. I stood there alone for a moment, breathing in the silence, steadying myself. My chest rose and fell slowly, my fists clenched at my sides. I knew what was about to happen. I had been replaying it in my head all night, every possible reaction, every gasp, every crack in their voices when the truth stood in front of them in flesh and blood. And then the sound of the door opening pulled me back to the present. The shuffle of footsteps, slow, uneven, but deliberate. My pulse spiked, my throat tightened. I turned, and there she was, Helena Ellison, my mother. She was thinner, her frame fragile, her shoulders not as straight as I remembered from when I was 13. But her face, the softness in her cheeks, the curve of her mouth, those same piercing eyes. God, it was her. Her hand gripped the arm of the nurse beside her for balance, but she carried herself with a dignity that not even Verena's lies could strip away. The room seemed to bend around her presence. Every breath caught in throats. Every sound seemed to hush. Darren froze by the fireplace, his jaw slack. Ellie pressed her hand against her lips as tears welled. Corinne, who had always prided herself on being the family's pillar of composure, dropped into a chair like her legs couldn't hold her. And Clayton, he looked like someone had ripped the ground out from under him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The weight of 12 years of silence was screaming too loud. Then Helena's voice, frail but unmistakably clear, broke the silence. I never left you, Jory. They forced me. The words stabbed through the room like a blade. Verena, standing in the corner, went pale. Her hands twitched against her sides. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no words ready, no weaponized smile to twist the truth. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked smaller, weaker, exposed under the truth that had just walked in wearing a frail woman's skin. And then she did what cowards do when cornered. She ran. She shoved her chair back, so violently it toppled, her heels clicking frantically against the floor as she fled down the hallway. The door slammed so hard behind her the walls rattled. Not one person followed her, because all eyes were still on Helena. The nurse guided her to a chair at the head of the table. Her chair. My mother's chair. The seat Verena had claimed for more than a decade. Watching Helena sit there again felt like the universe had finally started correcting itself. I sat beside her, my hand trembling as I reached for hers. Her skin was thinner, colder than I remembered, but her grip, still had strength. "You were never playing Jory," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "You were never worthless. They told you those things to break you because they were afraid of you, afraid of the truth." I swallowed hard, fighting the burn in my throat. The room was silent except for her voice. Nobody dared interrupt. I turned to face them all. Every cousin, every uncle, every relative who had looked the other way while Verena and Randall rewrote history. 12 years ago, they told you she ran away. They told you she abandoned me. They told you she was dead. They stole her money, her name, and her dignity. But she's here, alive. And today, all of you know the truth. I pulled the folder from my bag and dropped it on the table. Inside were the court filings, the medical records, the photos of the bracelet I had dug up from the dirt. Everything tied together like an executioner's rope. This house, the money, the inheritance, it doesn't belong to Verena. It never did. It belongs to Helena Ellison. And I'll make sure every last cent that was stolen is accounted for. Probate court will hear it today, and the world will hear it after that. No more secrets. No more whispers. Corinne whimpered something about shame and reputation, but I cut her off with a glare so sharp she snapped her mouth shut. Darren leaned back, muttering, "Jesus Christ," under his breath, as if it was only dawning on him now how deep the rot had gone. Clayton, though, he slammed his fist against the table. "This doesn't change anything. She left. She let this happen. You think dragging her back from the grave makes you some kind of hero?" Helena's voice, though weak, cut him off like a blade. "I didn't leave you, Clayton. I begged to stay. But your mother," she threatened me. "And your father." Her eyes flicked to the empty chair where Randall should have been. "Your father let her." The silence that followed was suffocating. Randall wasn't there to defend himself. He was lying in a hospital bed, hooked to machines, maybe even listening to the same lies echo in his head. He couldn't stop what was happening now. For once in his life, he couldn't save Verena from her own downfall. And that was the revenge I hadn't even needed to plan. The truth itself was enough. By noon, word had already begun to ripple through the family. Phones buzzed, whispers spread. Verena didn't return. She couldn't. Not when the empire she'd built out of stolen money and lies was crumbling in front of everyone. The probate court session that afternoon was brutal. Helena's appearance silenced the room before the judge even spoke. The documents I had filed, the records, the testimony, it all painted the story clearly. Verena had manipulated my mother into signing everything over under duress. Randall had allowed it, and they'd cashed out her life insurance like vultures circling a body that wasn't even dead. The ruling wasn't immediate, but the impact was. My mother's name was cleared. My inheritance was reinstated. And Verena's mask was gone forever. That night, I stood once more in the dining room, the air quieter than it had ever been. My mother's hand rested on mine. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the charity case. I wasn't the broken daughter. I was the one who won. I looked around at the walls that had once suffocated me and spoke the words I had carried inside all these years, the words that finally tasted like freedom. 12 years ago, they buried my mother with lies. Today, I dug her truth back out and buried them instead. So tell me, was I too cruel, or did they finally get what they deserved? Subscribe if you want to hear more stories where karma finally catches up.